Well, I hate to have to do this, but I have to admit that I was wrong and make a little bit of a retraction to my previous video about College Football 25. As many of you probably know and may have watched, I posted a pair of videos a few weeks back expressing some of my biggest challenges and frustrations with College Football 25. Those videos were focused on the difficulty of the kicking meter and problems that I was having adjusting to the revised option mechanics. I got a lot of flack on that kicking meter video, in particular, largely from people insisting that my troubles were a, quote, skill issue, unquote, as if, that wasn't the entire point. Yeah, I know it's a skill issue. That's why I was asking for difficulty settings, so that kicking would still be doable and the game still playable, while I develop the skill. I stand by most of what was presented in both of those videos. After all, the core complaint of both videos was the lack of tutorial and the lack of a skill trainer to teach the new mechanics, and also the lack of difficulty and customization settings to make these mechanics easier to use for people who are struggling. The lack of such features is still an absolutely valid complaint, and EA has yet to take any steps to address it other than to include links to watch tutorial videos online. And actually, they aren't even links that you can use on a console's browser. They're just QR codes that you would have to scan with your phone to watch the tutorial videos. So you need to scan these codes and watch the tutorials on a separate device than the one you're playing the game on. You can't even watch the tutorials on the console that you're playing the game on. Whatever. I mean, heck, the controller summary in the pause menu still does not show any of the read option or kicking controls, nor does it explain that the switch stick exists or give any explanation on how to use it. But I will admit that I was actually largely wrong about one of my biggest complaints with the option mechanic, and I want to correct that error here and explain how this mechanic actually works in case anybody else had the same confusion that I did, or if I actually gave you the wrong understanding. Let's see if we can fix that. In my video titled "The Option is Almost a Deal Breaker for College Football 25, I discussed how I was struggling with the new mechanic of having to hold the X button on the PS5 in order for the QB to keep the ball on a read option handoff play, and how the input windows didn't seem to line up with the actual mesh point animation for the handoffs and other problems. It turns out that the mesh point timing window is not actually as broken as I thought it was. In fact, it's really not even broken at all. And my problems were almost entirely the result of me not understanding how this mechanic actually works. Somehow, I got the mistaken impression that the user is supposed to hold the X button through the mesh animation in order to keep the ball, and could release the button at any point in order to hand off the ball. As such, I was pressing and holding X through the snap of the ball, and then continuing to hold X into the mesh point animation, then expecting that I could release X to hand off the ball. That's not how the mechanic works. In fact, looking back at the option tutorial pop-up later on, it didn't even say that that's how you're supposed to do it. So I misread it, or maybe I got this idea from somewhere else entirely, maybe from another YouTube video, I don't know. But in any case, because of the fact that there is no way to bring these tutorial pop-ups back up, or to see a summary or a list of all the tutorial pop-ups, or to view the option controls in any of the friggin' menus, I did not realize my mistake until much later, like a month later. I tried resetting the tutorials in the game settings, but I think that actually had the opposite effect, and it completely and permanently disabled all tutorials and all tooltips, and makes it so that you cannot turn them back on. This is a bug that EA needs to fix, and as far as I know, it has not yet been fixed. I'm sure there are plenty of people who pointed out my mistake in the comments of that previous video, but I've been too busy to go through all the comments, so if you did point out my mistake, and especially if you did so in a polite and civil manner, then I humbly thank you. I always appreciate when my mistakes are corrected, and I am always willing to admit to being wrong about a matter of fact. And I was definitely wrong here, and I'm also sorry if I gave any of my viewers the wrong impression about how this game works, or about this one aspect of the game's quality. Although, like I said before, I do still stand by pretty much everything else that I've said that is critical of this game. What you are actually supposed to do in the read option is to press and release the X button in order to snap the ball, just as you would do on any other play. And then during the mesh point, which is the point where the quarterback holds the ball out to the running back, you press or hold X to cancel the handoff and keep the ball with the QB. So it is, in fact, exactly the same as in Madden, except that the control is just the opposite. Hold the X button to keep the ball instead of hold the X button to hand it off. I felt so stupid when I realized this, and that it took me so long to realize it, and that I made a friggin' video entirely about it that I was completely wrong in. I do still have to occasionally battle with a decade of muscle memory telling me to hold the button to hand off the ball, so the criticism that there is not an option to revert the controls back to the way they used to be is still a perfectly valid complaint. But I admit I have gotten a lot better at the option play since I realized this, and I have since reincorporated it into my offensive playbook in both Play Now and Dynasty. I have also retested plays like the Navy's inverted veer, and you know what? They work just fine. I was just completely wrong about how all of this works. I also now see the logic in this particular design decision by EA. Because of the fact that quarterbacks do not run the ball as well as running backs and are in real life more prone to both fumbles and injuries, the default safer action of a read option play is to hand off the ball. This is true in real life football just as much as it is in video game football. So if the user does nothing, the QB hands off the ball in order to run the safer, more conservative play, which is the handoff. And that's actually not a bad design choice. In fact, for most read option plays, this might even be a better design than the older control of having to hold the button to hand off. So yeah, not only was I wrong, but realizing that I was wrong made me kind of change my mind about the design of the mechanic at fundamental levels. The major exception, though, is the triple option, in which handing off the ball to the fullback is not necessarily the default action. And in my defense, most of my early play time with the option controls in College Football 25 were with the Service Academy triple option in the Army-Navy game. This is where the new controls really tripped me up and where I cemented my mistaken understanding of how the new option controls work. The reason I was having so much trouble is that the game doesn't actually care about whether you release the button. If you are pressing or holding X at any time during the mesh point, the quarterback commits to keeping the ball, even if you release the X button after that, but before the handoff mesh is finished. And it is still true that the timing window for the option handoff is different in any given option play. Some plays allow the keeper override to happen much earlier than others, so with plays like Navy's inverted veer, because I was holding the X button when the mesh time window started, which is very early compared to other option plays in other playbooks, the QB was just instantly committing to keeping the ball, and that was why I was having so much trouble. But if I were to keep my thumb off the X button until the mesh actually happens, there is actually plenty of time to read the conflict defender and then press or hold the button to hand off the ball. Despite having been absolutely wrong about how the game mechanic works, I do, however, think that this actually validates my main point in both of those previous videos. This game really needs proper tutorials and an actual skill trainer to teach these mechanics, especially since there are a lot of people who are coming into this game who haven't played a football game, and definitely not an EA Sports football game, in 10 years since NCAA Football 14. Even longtime veterans of EA football games are misunderstanding these controls and mechanics, and it isn't just me, it's other people on the internet too. Whether they are also misunderstanding the actual mechanics or if they are having trouble shaking a decade of muscle memory. The fact that changing the tutorial pop-up settings in the game settings menu, the fact that that breaks and disables all future tutorials is also a pretty big friggin' problem that EA has apparently not fixed and which needs to be fixed. Showing this one pop-up one time is not sufficient for a user to actually learn and remember this mechanic. And no, I seriously do not think that open practice and mini games are a sufficient tool for tutorializing mechanics like this to the player, because they do not give explanations and definitely not demonstrations of how the mechanic should properly be executed. And they do not give direct feedback if the user is executing the mechanic incorrectly. I did go into practice mode and practice the read option before posting that previous video. I showed clips of it in that previous video. But because I went into practice with a flawed understanding of how the game worked, I was practicing it wrong. And you know the old saying, practice does not make perfect. Perfect practice makes perfect. I was practicing wrong, and the game did not do anything to tell me that I was doing it wrong. Including a skill trainer like what is in Madden would be a good start, but even the skill trainer has room for improvement. Ideally, what I would like the skill trainer to have in both college football and in Madden is actual demonstrations of these mechanics in practice with like a little graphic of the controller in the corner showing which buttons are being pressed at which times, so that the user can get more feedback about if you're just using the mechanic wrong and about the timing of doing things like this. Such a tutorial would have instantly cleared up all of my confusion about this mechanic, and I wouldn't have needed to make a whole video about thinking the mechanic wasn't working. And it, would have spared me a little bit of internet embarrassment. I mean, nobody likes to admit they're wrong. Nobody likes to have to do it on a public platform to the entire world, like on the friggin' internet, and that's what I'm doing here. And it sucks, and it's embarrassing. I wish the game had a friggin' tutorial so that I wouldn't have had to embarrass myself like that. I also still think that there should be at least an option to revert the read option controls back to the way they used to work in Madden. The older controls might be more comfortable for users who do play with the triple option teams, such as the service academies. And I see no reason for why those players should be forced to have to use the new control that might lead to more accidental handoffs to the fullback due to the narrower timing windows from formations like the flexbone. As for the other complaints I've levied against College Football 25, I am getting better at kicking. It's taken weeks, but it is happening. I still feel like I miss more field goals than I would like, especially on the hashes, but I am getting better. I still maintain that the game should have difficulty settings for kicking, since the barrier of entry, I feel, is just way too high and could still scare away casual players. If I were to play this game with my friends who hardly ever play football video games, I would have a huge advantage just in the kicking department, because I guarantee you they're going to miss every single kick they try to make. And now, my biggest problem with the game are, in fact, general bugs and defensive AI. Specifically, the poor pursuit angles and the complete unwillingness of the CPU-controlled defensive players to play any outside containment at all, ever. EA said that they patched the game to improve pursuit angles, but I still feel like I have to constantly babysit my force defenders in order to make sure that runs stay to the inside. I know a lot of people keep insisting that this bad defensive and kicking play in this game is a feature because college players supposedly aren't as good as NFL players and they make more mistakes. And sure, whatever, that's true, I guess. Personally, I think that if you're going to make defensive players play poorly on purpose, then I think offensive players need to be more mistake-prone in order to balance things out. If defenses cannot contain or pursue well, then maybe running backs shouldn't be able to see and hit the holes as well, and they should occasionally just trip and fall in the open field. If defensive backs can't stick to their assignments or cover passes effectively, then maybe QBs should not be as accurate, and receivers should occasionally run the wrong routes and drop open passes. And honestly, receivers should definitely not be as unbelievably good at downfield blocking and sealing the edge. And maybe there should even be other potential offensive mistakes, such as fumbled handoffs, especially on read options and RPOs that are mistimed, and maybe even botched snaps on shotgun and special teams plays. And all of this should be doubly true at the lower levels of the game, such as in the group of 5, where players aren't nearly as good as those in the power conferences. And if you're okay with defensive players completely whiffing on their assignments and refusing to take even halfway decent pursuit angles or refusing to tackle, but you're not willing to accept things like runners tripping and falling, more dropped passes, or botched snaps, then personally, I think that's a pretty hypocritical stance to take. Should the distribution of such breakdowns favor the offensive side of the ball a little bit more than the defensive? Yeah, sure. But there should at least be some poor offensive play in order to counterbalance the poor defensive play. And there should also be slider sets and options to customize all of this. Maybe we should have a slider for defensive pursuit and running back vision. I've been trying to come up with a slider set that would accomplish at least some of what I've mentioned, and if I do find something that works, maybe I'll upload a video breaking down my custom sliders. Maybe it'll be a Patreon exclusive. We'll see if I come up with something that works reliably well. And honestly, right now, I have all of the defensive sliders except for interceptions at 100, and the defenses are still playing like garbage, so this is not looking good. Also, if the game is going to force sloppy, unrefined play from my players, then I really think that the game should have some weekly training or game planning features that allow me to improve specific areas of plays that my players are performing poorly at. You know, like what's been in Madden for like a decade now, and I can't believe I just had to give a favorable comparison to Madden against a college football game, because usually that's always worked the other way around. But that way, being beat on these sorts of things actually becomes an element of coaching strategy, rather than feeling like the complete crapshoot that it is right now. And it would also be nice to have some control over how my players develop and what skills they improve over the course of the season or of their collegiate careers. You know, also like what's been in Madden for like a decade now. And of course, it would be nice if things like inside shade and outside shade would actually friggin' work, and if there was a way to commit to just defending outside instead of having to commit to a running play that goes in one direction or the other. If deliberately incompetent defensive play is actually the core design philosophy that EA is going to follow, and if it is not fixable with sliders and option settings, and not offset by similarly incompetent offensive play like what I proposed before, then that might end up being the final deal breaker for me when it comes to EA College Football 25. I have one final mini rant before I go, but before I do that, I also want to remind everyone that my channel is not monetized. One of the reasons for that is that I don't want your viewing experience to be disrupted by intrusive ads, nor do I want to willingly shill corporate product. But there might be ads that YouTube placed before within my videos due to the fact that I often include copywritten footage of NFL games, music, and other stuff. But I did not put those ads there, and I don't get a penny from them. Instead, my content is completely funded by the generous donations of viewers like you via Patreon. I recently released a new video exclusively to patrons about the learning scenario of Star Wars Armada, the tabletop game. This video was actually several years in the making, and I had actually promised it to my patrons over a year ago, but it just took a while to organize games to get the footage, and the video just kept getting delayed. Now, the game's publisher, Atomic Mass Games, which is a subsidiary of Asmodee, which many video game players are probably familiar with as a shit corporation that likes to cancel things, has announced that they have ended support for Star Wars Armada. There won't be any new content released for the game, and not even any reprints of existing content. So it's now entirely up to us, the fans and players, and our 3D printers, to keep this game alive. So I felt some increased pressure to get that Armada video done. It will be a patron exclusive for about a month before being released to the public in October. I've also been working for the past year on a massive retrospective of Star Trek video games, and there's previews of that project on Patreon as well. If you want to see that Star Wars video, or previews of the Star Trek videos, or any of my other video content early, then please consider becoming a patron for as little as $1 a month. I know a lot of other content creators list the names of their patrons in their videos, but I don't do that because, as far as I know, a creator's patrons are not publicly visible anywhere on the Patreon site. So I consider the identities of my patrons to be anonymous, and I want to preserve their privacy. So instead of thanking you all by name, I want to offer sincere thanks to all of my patrons, past, present, and future, as your support really does make a difference. I also want to take this opportunity to talk about some serious concerns that I have about the online community for this game and the direction that it's going. I got way more pushback and negative comments and dislikes on a video that was almost entirely opinion, but which had negative things to say about the game, and not on a video in which I was objectively wrong about a key matter of fact. That does not bode well for the future of this game and its community. It looks like this community is already pretty strongly fractured along, for lack of a better word, partisan lines. If good faith criticism on YouTube, Reddit, and other platforms is going to be met and stifled by repeated skill issue troll responses, then this game is not going to have a healthy or robust online community. It will lack constructive feedback, and the game will stagnate in the years to come, just like Madden has in the past. Are we seriously going to resurrect the toxic Dark Souls get good meme from 15 years ago? Because that meme, it was problematic then, but it's even dumber and more counterproductive now in this situation than it was back then with Dark Souls. Dark Souls is a single-player action RPG that is entirely skill-based. The get good meme, as snobbish and elitist and ableist and unhelpful as it was, actually does have a kernel of truth and validity to it, because practicing the game more, learning stamina management, attack timings, and enemy tells through enough practice and sheer repetition will actually make you better at the game. Eventually. Outside of some rare loot drops, Dark Souls is a game that is entirely deterministic and predictable. Each encounter is the same across every attempt and play session, and it can be effectively solved through perseverance and rote repetition. But with a football game, none of that is the case. You can only control one player on the field at a time, out of 22, 11 of which are on your team. That means that more than 95% of what happens on the field is outside of the user's direct control. And unlike the individual combat encounters, boss fights, and set pieces of Dark Souls, no two matches or plays or rematches of the same match in football are the same. I'm sorry, but football video games are just inherently chaotic and have a massive luck component. The player is far more at the mercy and whims of the software and its developers than in something like Dark Souls, which can be brute forced. So responding with skill issue instead of actual specific advice is just that much more counterproductive than Get Good was 15 years ago. Honestly, it's really not any better than giving a person gambling advice by saying, get luckier. This skill issue meme needs to stop. If we as a community do not clamp down on these skill issue trolls, then in a few years, when the game hasn't gotten any better because all of the criticism was drowned out by a chorus of apologist fanboys, then the growing number of us who are out of the honeymoon phase will have no recourse but to go back to playing NCAA 14 or pining for a new 2K college football game. And if that group currently does not include you, well, it might include you in the future.